do Q&A. All right, I am very happy to announce our next session on housing, our next and last session on housing. We just went from some kind of big thinking, big ideas, complexity. We're going now a little bit simpler to some local models. Without further ado, I am happy to introduce Dana Hooper from Life Services Alternatives, and his specialty, as you will learn, is in licensed residential homes here in the Bay Area. Dana.
Thank you, Jill, and it's a really honor to be here. I first attended one of these 4 years ago and had the opportunity to talk about what we were doing. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about a licensed facility, also known as a group home, and hope to give you an understanding of what that model looks like and how it can be appropriate, not only appropriate, but an excellent living opportunity for individuals on the spectrum and with developmental disabilities. Just real briefly about Life Services Alternatives. Our whole mission in life is to provide exceptional community living and programs for adults with disabilities. We kind of broke this down into two goals. In order for it to be a great place to live, which is our first and foremost goal for the individuals who live in our homes, we also had to make it a great place to work. And that's been one of the greatest challenges in this field with the low rates and pay points, but it's a very important thing. And then finally, we kind of came to the realization that that there's a need for high quality homes, and that we could and should try and add one a year. Just a little bit of an overview. It's a relatively young organization, founded in 2002. We added 3 homes in 2004, and then 5 special medical homes over the next 2 or 3 years, and have been adding more or less a home a year ever since. Along the way, we introduced a day program, community integration training program. We were selected by the San Andreas Regional Center as Service Provider of the Year, and have grown to a point now where we have purchased our 12th home and are in the middle of remodeling it and licensing it. The residential model, I want to talk briefly about its history and the trends, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how it's structured and how the nuts and bolts work, and finally end up talking a little bit about pros and cons and how it might look from the standpoint of some of the other models that are out there. First of all, and maybe somewhat surprising, the level of homes and openings in these homes has been flat to declining over the years. This has been a function of, here in the state of California, of the state controlling costs by freezing rates, and complicated even further by increasing costs of doing business. And so many providers have closed up shop. There have been some new homes, mostly financed by state funds, community placement plan funds, to do specialized homes, and I'll talk more about what those look like. And these have been primarily designed to handle the population coming out of institutions. And the HCBS rule probably will further dampen the number of beds. Here in the state of California, looking at the whole population, some 3,000, 78% still live at home. The biggest pie slice other than living at home is community care facilities. Here in the San Andreas Regional Center, similar proportions. For individuals 22 years and older, it drops to 55% at home with 23% living in community care facilities. What's a community care facility? It's licensed residential care overseen by community care licensing. It's vendorized, overseen by the regional centers, and there are different types. Most are 4 to 6 residents. The licensing requires the provider to own or control the facility. It's 24/7 staffing. It's a residential model. Individuals are expected to go out during the day to work or to go to a day program. There are some for-profit, some not-for-profit providers. The levels reflect differing levels of needs of the individuals. And so you have rates varying by level, and you have required staffing varying by level. Additional funding beyond the standard rates requires a specific health and safety waiver from the state. I'll speak a little bit about level 4 homes. These are typically range in levels from A to I. The key differences involve how much help someone needs in daily living, how much help they need ambulating, and how much help they need keeping themselves and others safe. There are this new and emerging category of specialized residential facilities. Some of them are behavioral, some of them are medical. I'll talk a little bit more about them. Over the past 10 years, the state has funded some 500 additional beds in these specialized residential models. About 70% of them are called special residential facilities, typically behaviorally oriented in their programs. There's another category of almost 40 that are these medical homes, of which we have 5. 5 of the 38 are LSA homes. This is a further breakdown. The gist of the way the system works for a licensed home is depending on what level you are licensed at and how many residents you have. The chart tells you how much money you will receive per month per resident. These rates have been fixed and only increased once in the last 10 years. So you can imagine how challenging it can be in a high cost of living area like the Bay Area. Another chart tells you what the minimum staffing hours are. Same thing. Pick your level, pick the number of residents, and it defines the minimum number of direct staffing hours. Any good provider will tell you that these are just minimums. The rates are a maximum, the staffing's a minimum, and if you're good, you're going to have to figure out how to put together a program, retain good people, and deliver good service. But this is the environment you work in. Couple other models that have been talked about: supported living, or if you will, individualized support that is independent of the facility. Big differences with community care licensed facilities is not licensed. The facility is independent of the service, and the rate is for supported living is only for the hours of support, whereas the rate for a group home is complete. So it includes everything: food, care, housing, transportation. It's all included. Pros, simply it's group living. And so this can be both a huge advantage and it can be a disadvantage. So like any group living situation, who you live with, where you live, how appropriate it is for you matters. But there are great opportunities for developing, socializing, doing things with others, becoming part of a community. Like we say, it's really not about the physical home, it's all about making it into a real home. And so that is potentially an advantage. If it really becomes that kind of a home environment, there are a tremendous number of secondary benefits over time as we see individuals grow, develop, become more independent, and possibly choose to live more independently. The biggest con, at the end of the day, it's a group living situation. In our model, with 5 bedrooms, 5 individuals, 1 to 3 staff. So, there's inherent limitations on the amount of resource that will allow individuals to do things independent of their roommates. What I always tell parents, I'm a parent too, think more broadly about models than what's good for my son or daughter today, because that may not always be the case. Really understand, what kind of a model, what kind of a program would be appropriate. It's not always appropriate for everyone. And really understand that, service providers aren't necessarily interchangeable. And it's really all about finding someone who not only gets it, but is good at what they do. And determining how much you want to be involved. We welcome involvement. Not always is that necessarily desired, but we welcome it. And then when it comes to choosing a provider, so if you were going to look into this model, I always say what really matters is the values, and what values does that service provider have? Do they live them? How do I know they live them? How excellent are their homes by seeing? And when they talk about community or community involvement, what exactly do they mean, and how does that work? And of course, lastly, how stable are they? How committed? Really, what's their track record? So for me, we need a couple of policy changes. The biggest one is we need to have rates based on costs. And we need to have a system that rewards quality instead of tries to find faults. And I'd also like to see it making it easier for families to invest in this type of a model. I've got some additional resources. I've got some copies of this presentation. and some contact information that's also embedded in the presentation. Please reach out if there's anything I can do to be helpful. Thank you, Jill.
All right, and here it comes. You got it? Okay. All right, I'm your next speaker. One of the hats I wear is as a private landlord. About 11 years ago, I just sort of looked at this growing and growing and growing autism population, and I saw nothing happening out there in terms of providing more housing for adults. So I decided to take some nest egg and try to create housing opportunities for adults with developmental disabilities, having absolutely no idea what I was doing. And it was a really good thing that I had no idea, otherwise I never would have done it. So ignorance can be your friend. So what I do is really, I'm the opposite of Denise Resnick. So Denise is like there, and doing this and doing that, and there's like everything in the community and Leadership Institute. And I'm like, no, I'm just simple brick and mortar, door and key, and that's all I do. Just basic landlording. I don't do any services. I don't vision beyond that. It's just a personal investment that I make with my partner, who's my husband, and I don't deal with anybody else. It's hard enough just to work with my husband. I get solicited all the time. Jill, don't you want to invest in this? Don't you want to do this? Like, no, I can't do it. This is not a charitable endeavor. I do expect at least some profit, like any other ordinary landlord from what I do. I select as some of my tenants, not all of them, adults with developmental disabilities. And in order for them to live in my units, which are these units, or at least are all in Santa Cruz, they need to have vouchers from the housing authority. They cannot afford my units. They do not work generally, right? Or if they do work, they just make a pittance. So these Section 8 vouchers come from the local housing authority, and they pay the vast majority of their rent, as you will soon see. So we've had 12 developmentally disabled adult tenants. Now we currently have 9 in different settings. One is studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and one's even in a 3-bedroom house. There are 2 kinds of Section 8. One is called project-based vouchers. That's when you contract with your local housing authority, in this case Santa Cruz, for an entire building or a portion of that building to be dedicated to people with low incomes, or sometimes low incomes with other things like developmental disabilities. Here's a 12-plex you might have seen on your way to the beach boardwalk. That is project-based. It's entirely contracted, 12 units. And then some of my other tenants have what are called portable vouchers, where they come with a subsidy kind of attached to them, and then they can choose where they want to live, assuming they find a landlord like me who's willing to rent to somebody with a Section 8 voucher. That doesn't always happen. So 12 pack, that's just to tell you about the numbers. The monthly market rate is set by the housing authority. I have very little say over it. It is way under market rate. Okay, I do not make as much money as I could if I wasn't in this business. So the rent's about $1,200, and that includes all utilities, by the way. That's how cheap this rent is. The tenant pays 1/3 of their Social Security. Their Social Security is about $900. They pay about $300. The balance comes out of the housing authority. I get money from them every month, $900, more or less. So what are the pros and cons? The pro is, from the investor point of view, you retain control, right? If you give a charitable donation, it's a donation, it's gone. And the investment here is transferable. If I want to sell it, I can sell it. And the best thing is I don't provide any services. I would be a dead person if I had to provide services. The regional center through ILS and supported living services provides the services. And sometimes families are providing services too. That's another story. Cons. It's very expensive to be in this business. I mean, it's no joke. The Bay Area is insanely expensive, and it's very hard for an investor to get even a foot in, even a little toe into this pool. As I said, you do sacrifice market rate rents. And you're not a nonprofit. You don't get a property tax waiver. You have to pay everything that every other landlord who's getting market rate is paying. And I think most importantly, from the point of view of the tenants, the biggest downside is this really isn't for every tenant with a developmental disability. You're going to have advocates say, yeah, everybody with a developmental disability, they can live in generic housing, they can live anywhere they want in the community, and that is just not true. Denise alluded to that. As a landlord, you have the legal duty to make sure that your property is safe and you have, reasonable quiet for your other tenants. I've had a tenant in the past who they didn't try to, but he almost burned down one of my properties twice. It is not okay to keep someone like that on as a tenant. I'm sorry, ADA goes far, but it doesn't cover everything. So these people do have risk of eviction. You really do need other models that are far more protected and far more suitable, especially for severe behaviors. And I've also seen some tenants, not necessarily my own, really horrifically isolated in some of these situations. They have their own apartment. It sounds great. They're in the community, but they're basically at home all day with a really bored aide. And I sometimes, it's painful to see. So, but the biggest problem is this model is completely dependent on housing vouchers from our housing authorities, and right now those vouchers are not existent. You can't even get on the wait list for them. And this is a national shame and tragedy that even our people who are the most severely impaired cannot get any priority, any way to get a housing voucher, even though they have no chance of ever making a living or caring for themselves. It is a shame. So what is the secret to success in this model? Is to be a bad business person. You can be successful, but don't know what you're doing like me and be willing to sacrifice a lot and deal with a lot of bureaucracy, but it can be very rewarding. Thank you. Anna Wang. Anna needs almost no introduction. I hope everyone knows her. And Anna Wang will talk about a project she has in Fremont and otherwise.
Do I just click here?
Yeah,
okay.
Down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Click that. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Wang, and also known as Auntie Anna of Friends of Children with Special Needs, FCSN. I am proud to be a mother of 3 wonderful children, and one of it, which has autism, diagnosed when he was 3, and now he's 28. And we built this particular model because as a parent, we always worry what is going to happen to our kids when they grow up and we grow old and we get sick or we pass along and they have no one that knows how to take care of them. So we are here not to speak about just the family LLC model, but the family LLC dream community model, because it just doesn't only take a house to make this place for the individuals to be happy and have a good future, and for the family to kind of rest in peace and not turn over in their grave. So, so I'm talking about a parents co-op model, and it's parents driven. And at FCSN, we are trying to empower all the families to be turn all their worries to positive action. And that actually starts when the children are young, not only when you can. I always, once a year, I get this phone call from someone who's in a wheelchair and call me up and say, Anna, when can I take my adult child who is 65 years old over to FCSN and live in your apartment, and then, and he will have someone to take care of. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. I hope that, the families try to plan as early as possible, but no worries, it's never too late. So our organization started with 10 families in 1996, which is 21 years ago. And we have family support program, children's program, and adult program. So this whole group of people grew into over 1,000 families right now, currently, after 21 years. Our mission is to help individuals with special needs and their families find love, hope, respect, and support through integrated community involvement. We believe that it's not enough to just help the individual themselves, because they spend the most time with their family. So in order for the individual to have a good future, the entire family had to thrive and have a good future and have a life. So that's how we started the Dream Project. The Dream Project, we are, very impatient family members. We want, things that, to give nice things to our children yesterday, not, wait a long time. And knowing just from all the presenters that have gone before me, we know that waiting for Section 8 vouchers is almost impossible. We want to wait for government funding, which is very difficult. So we try it on our own and not put all our eggs in one basket. We also always advocate for government benefit and all that. But at the same time, the families, when they are grouped together, they are powerful and they have much more resource that they at their fingertips that they can help their own children. So we have a partnership between a group of families who's going to do the investing model, just like we are bad business people, just like Joe. But because we choose to be bad business people because we want a better future for our children. So we have a group of investors, the family members, and in partnership with the nonprofit, FCSN, which provide all the different services. So it's a for-profit organization partnering with a nonprofit organization. And also, just like we were saying that in Jill's model, she doesn't want to deal with service provision because that is a whole different animal. And if you have to deal with more than one service provider that you have actually not much control over, it is very, very hard to work with when you have, say, 50 individuals living in a community situation, or, so it's very hard to tell other, because you're not their boss, right? And it's very hard to tell a 10 different service provider what to do and provide good service that will not infringe into other individuals with special needs rights. So we decided to just partner with FCSN, the service provider, to build a loving home, a caring village, and a dream community. And this is the housing that the parents privately invest in, and that is already in existence for 11, almost 12 years. It's privately owned by all the parents that decide in investing in an apartment building. So they are just like landlord of anyone, any apartment owners in the community. It's held in an LLC. And their own adult children with developmental disabilities have the right to occupy this apartment. Unfortunately, just like Joe was saying, not everybody is fit in this particular model. We have no capacity to handle really severe behavioral individuals and with severe medical needs individuals. The apartments are 4-bedroom units, and there's 10 units in the complex. And we are looking to replicate this model. We already have phase 2 and phase 3 planned. So there's just too many families on the waiting list wanting to that kind of model. I can only talk about the pros of this model, and you will see why. To me, there is no cons to this model because we are looking at providing the housing and providing the service. A lot of times when you have the housing, you can have the individual live in a castle when you have no service and no consistent service. That is just hell living in a castle. Okay, so for the pros for the family is affordable investment. You share the property and the building cost, and you are guaranteeing a right to occupy your children in this particular housing. And so this is where the investment part comes in. Every individual that lives in the apartment is privately paying for the rent. And also the caregivers that coming with the individual also pay the same rent. And the rent without even the affordable housing, we think is affordable, is less than $700 a month per individual. Actually, it's much less than $700. I don't want to release that information. And each family that invests in this model gets a return annually around $10,000 each family. Each person have their own private bedroom, and two share one bathroom, and they live with housemate, and it feels like a community, and they hang out at different people's apartment unit, and they watch American Idol or America's Got Talent or the Warrior games together. So and also they go out and have a lot of fun. The pros continue. It's cost effective for the investors because you are paying, sharing the property tax and the maintenance costs, and we have a centralized LLC housing management to handle any kind of emergency situations, such as the water main broke and somebody's forgot to turn off the water when they take a bath. We have all that under control, and allows for flexible matching of roommates. Because, just think about there's drama between our individuals living together. Think of the drama you have with your husband or your wife. Okay, so, and we want them to live happily ever after. We don't want them to keep on fighting. And you're talking about a whole group of people living around each other in close proximity. So we have specialists coming in to provide conflict resolution. And because it's in this situation where we are using the same service provider, we put in a lot of monitors to make sure our individuals are not abused. And so just now, our particular individuals living in their own apartment, they have staff and support, and 24/7. And these are the happy faces. And they go on parties, snow trips, Tahoe, just hang out in the sun. They go out to Disneyland as well. It's a person-centered, integrated, blissful community that we welcome everyone to replicate. And that's it.
I welcome back Michaela Connery to the podium. Oh, Ashley, I'm sorry. You're welcome soon. Ashley Kim, it's wonderful to see you.
Yeah. All right, so hi, I'm Ashley Kim. I'm with Elevare Community, which is a non-for-profit organization based in Los Angeles that's aiming to build affordable and other non-for-profit housing specifically for individuals with special needs. So my journey actually began in about four and a half years ago when I was actually a business consultant, and some families came to me asking to help them convert their homes into a group home. And at that time, I was actually looking into investing in senior care models, so I thought it was very parallel. So I jumped into it, not knowing that this was going to be my path for until now. So with that, when I actually went out and looked for resources for individuals with autism, I was really shocked that there was really nothing out there. And there were lack of professionals really jumping into this field as well. Actually, more people were going into the senior care, but not enough people going for adults with developmental disabilities. So I felt that as a person of faith, I felt like this was going to be my calling. So as a result, in 2014, with a group of families in Pasadena and La Cañada area, we co-founded Villa de Vida. And we wanted to actually model after an organization called Casa de Ama in San Juan Capistrano. It's an amazing community. And it was actually funded by a very, very, very generous family who spent all their money, family foundation, completely gave it over to a non-for-profit, debt-free, and it's a very thriving community, which continues to be a model community for a lot of people across the country. So with their support, I actually moved to San Diego to partner with the city of Poway to acquire their 3-acre parcel property to develop a 54-unit apartment communities that would be all affordable and 100% set aside for people with special needs. It's in a very ideal residential neighborhood. Our design was pretty much copying everything from Casa de Ama, so it was modeled after them. So community room, multi-purpose rooms, very specific universal design where you could live in those units in every stage in your life, physically, in every age. We also received 53 project-based vouchers from the County of San Diego. Basically, Jill went over that, so I'm not going to get into the details of it. Villa de Vida did apply for 9% tax credit in the last round, but we were definitely not competitive enough to receive credit. So it's going to have to wait until March of 2018, which is actually kind of, I'm not just using that as an excuse, but it's actually kind of normal to wait a couple of rounds until you make it. But I am going to talk about pros and cons about affordable housing in the next few slides. So construction actually begins when all the funding rounds are completed, and the last tax credit round, which is the largest portion of the funding sources, is going to have to be achieved in order to start breaking ground. So these are the examples of development funding sources. Obviously, the tax credit equity is a huge source. We also managed to raise about $2.5 million privately. And thanks to the low-income housing tax credit rule in California, any money that we raise in public can really help us to become more competitive in the 9% tax credit process. And the city gave us the land contribution. Actually, this is a typo. It's not worth $300 million. It's actually worth $3 million. Sorry. And we're also receiving, City of Poway also committed about $500,000 to this project, but I believe the last time I spoke with Mercy Housing, which is our development partner, the city is going to increase their contribution to help us boost our tax credit competitiveness. And these are typical sources: affordable housing program loans and project vouchers. Many of the project-based voucher program allows up to 100% of the vouchers if you have a special needs project. But if you have like large family income, units, then they probably allow you up to 25%. That's pretty typical. I knew that was in San Diego and Los Angeles. I don't know how it is not upstairs, up north. The benefit of affordable housing model is that you can really have access to government-owned land, and except for the city of Los Angeles, I think many cities actually have land in really good places. I mean, I looked at the list of city of Los Angeles parcels, and I said, no, thank you. I wouldn't want to live there because it was just not an ideal place for our population. And you can definitely leverage different sources of funding. So that means that it's not out of your reach if you don't have a lot of resources on your own, that you could actually make something happen with less of what we have, and it's affordable. So I know a lot of families might not be able to afford hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some of people that I mean, if I had a child with special needs, I would not be able to afford even $500 out of my pocket. So I do acknowledge that, and that's why I value affordable housing for our individuals. But I've seen a lot of organizations that rushed into building something beautiful, but their programs are not as good. And I think when you're looking into affordable housing option, you definitely have to think about having enough funding enough to have a good program. Without that, I think it's not going to be sustainable long term. The downside of affordable housing is that it takes a long time to build. For example, Villa de Vida, which is kind of on hold right now because it has to wait until March of 2018 to apply again. And it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get it that round either. And you can't offer guarantees or preferences. And to my surprise, even though HUD says that you can't do geographic preferences, many cities actually do require that. And somehow legally they lawyer up and actually make it happen. And I think everyone's so busy with different things that they're just not even dealing with it. And if somebody decides to file a lawsuit and say you can't do this, nobody's going to be challenging these geographical preferences. So I think that, and there are many restrictions about tenant selection process, development design, budget. I've gone through so many performas with the city's consultants, county consultants, justifying why we need many community rooms, justifying why we need a big bathroom for wheelchair access. I mean, there's just so many different things that, when you're actually trying to have to justify everything to people that do not understand this population, it can be pretty draining. And funding is very difficult for people, our projects now, because of everyone understands in California and many other big states in the country, the homeless population and the veterans. I mean, that's a big problem for many cities and government agencies. So when I go out to City of LA or other cities and advocate for our housing, and I say, well, why can't you include our DD housing when homeless population, the $2 billion initiative, the No Place Like Home initiative that allows homeless or mentally ill but not for DD, they say, well, you guys are not the most vulnerable. You guys are vulnerable, but not the most. And so that's one things that we have to really think about, and that actually hurts our competitiveness in the tax credit application, because many government agencies are pouring in hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, so you can't really compete against that. So, and non-for-profit leadership can be very, very challenging. I come from a for-profit world, so this was a huge shock for me that a lot of things were just very different. The culture is very different, and you can't really recruit top talent with non-for-profit budget. So, and it's really hard to attract, especially in the state of California, when everybody wants to, have the next big startup, in tech world, and everyone wants to design, the next Snapchat or Facebook. It's really hard to recruit those kind of talents and motivate them to actually do something innovative in this field. So, and also, as of last night, the Senate actually passed a tax bill, which is a huge deficit for us, because that means the tax credits are going to worth lot lower. When Donald Trump got elected and when the Republicans took over the government last November, a lot of tax credit investors actually walked away from their deals because they thought, well, Republicans are in power, we can find ways to save taxes in other ways, so we don't need to invest in this. So this means that for the state of California, there are two types of tax credit program, 9% and 4%, and basically the 4% credit, without getting into details, is pretty much at risk, and it could even be eliminated. So earlier this year, because of this issue, I actually moved back to LA and started another organization called Elevare Community. We partner with different housing developer, and we are working on several different models. One is in San Bernardino County, that's actually mixed income for sale. Also market rate units to allow more flexibility. And we're also partnering, or we're in the process of partnering with a private investor to purchase a property right outside of Los Angeles, a very ideal place. And we tried to follow Anna Wang's model, but we couldn't find enough families to invest. So we actually went to a private investor group, and they're going to be owning the building. And if all goes well, then Elevare will provide services. So these are the cities and counties and agencies that I met with over the last 3 years, and then many more. The reason why I wanted to show you this is that you can't just call and wait for government to come and help you. You have to knock on their doors and be as loud as possible and the most annoying person in the room. And then they'll listen to you, and they might squeeze out some options for you. And do something and start an organization. And I just, can't emphasize you to be flexible and be open-minded and just be open. And don't think about what if we fail. Think about this is something that has to happen, because if you don't do it, the government's not going to do it for you. Thank you so much.
Now I really do have the pleasure of bringing back Michaela Connery.
Awesome. So as that's pulling up, so I'm not a, I gotta go high again. I'm looking up like Denise says. I am not a parent, but I do come at this from a self-interested point of view because I want to live in an inclusive community. And I think that's really important to think about is what if, and I've spent the last 3 years as a graduate student researching disability housing, and I had this realization that a lot of the things that individuals with disabilities we say they need and desire out of their housing are actually the same things that my peers and my friends and I want out of housing. And I love this picture because I think the arm motions are so interesting. This was at a L'Arche community that I visited in DC when I was doing my research at the Kennedy School. And a resident showing me her home, ta-da, this is where I live. It's a place I'm proud of. I can be myself. I have everything I want out of it. And this is my little sister as she got ready to move into her first independent living experience this last summer. So I hope we can make more of these, ta-da, this is my own home moments a reality. So the Kelsey's model, I'm based here in San Francisco, is to create fully inclusive, mixed ability, mixed income housing communities. Our model is to mix market rate housing, affordable housing, and disability housing together on one site. And we've done a lot of different sensitivity analyses to determine what sort of the ideal tenant mix would be across those communities. As Jill and many others alluded to, the idea of relying on project-based or person-based rental assistance is not the reality, unfortunately, right now. I'd love to live in a world where that is, and I think we can work to change that. But until it is the reality, we need to create opportunities for models that can sustain themselves based on what I believe is really a powerful internal cross-subsidy. So how do you take market rate units and use those units to cross-subsidize the rents of individuals with disabilities? We've run the model in the Bay Area with Bay Area numbers, and in a tenant community that mixes these three populations, you can actually generate somewhere between a 3 to 7% return on cost, depending on what you do with the unit mixes. And that's without any subsidy or different public sources. So the 3% return on cost isn't super exciting to a private developer, but it is better than our status quo. And actually, when you look at certain impact investing markets, it's actually a pretty compelling approach. Some of the pros and cons around this. The pros for me are a fully integrated community, a financially sustainable model without public sources, and a way to demonstrate something that can be replicable and scalable. The cons are that we are not a service provider, and we understand the issues that comes with, and we don't desire to be. And we recognize that independent community living is messy and risky and scary. And that's a con that we're really comfortable. We have a whole section of our business plan about risk, and I know as parents that's a really scary question, and it's something we think a lot about. So we'd love to work with you on how we think through that. But there are some cons around this, and sort of the idea that different housing models are right for different people, we understand and believe strongly on, but we also think that there's a way to make independent community living with the right supports possible for everybody. So that's a big commitment of ours. A big way that we do that is through our on-site inclusion concierge, as well as based on the sort of European and Canadian models. As Jill mentioned, I spent some time in Ireland around circles of neighbors or circles of support. So how do you supplement staff and family with some natural supports and unpaid supports in the community? These are sort of the three key things that I think we need to do better in the disability housing world, and this is coming out of my research and a lot of what the Kelsey's model is based on. So the first is a framework. I was actually nerding out with Denise about this morning. When I took a class at Harvard Law School, I'm not a lawyer, but I took a class on disability law, and I noticed that there was a preference, and it was at the same time there was a lot of housing debates, and I noticed that a lot of cases and a lot of discussions center around one of these three. They're really focused on providing care. They're really obsessive about providing access of disabled people into non-disabled community, or they're really focused on providing providing choice. And often, unfortunately, we pick one of the three at the expense of another. And I really am interested in how we create a language where people can talk about that sweet spot, where we give people choice, care, and access. And I believe it's possible to do all three at the same time and sort of create some common ground where we can make some policy solutions that benefit our community overall and that recognize the diversity within our community. I think we need to have local partnerships and national scalability. So in the Bay Area here, we've begun working with the Bay Area Housing Corporation. I'm never going to become an expert in the local market in the same way that they have from their years of work. So we can bring an organization with a local track record, a local infrastructure, and a local ability to take on financing, together with sort of our focus on national expertise and a model that's replicable and scalable. There are over 25,000 organizations like Bach and like many others around the country. So if you can figure out how to do those two together, we think that's a really powerful model for scale. And then the last is to create financially sustainable models, not overly reliant on a particular source of funding. And that also comes to a big interest of mine, which is who's not in the room today. Because for folks with disabilities who are reliant on SSI, their rents are capped at about $270, $290 a month, what they can afford. So how do we make sure that our models include those people in it too? So the last, I'll just say that we're putting together funding for a community in San Mateo, and I'd be happy to sort of talk to you about where we are and what we're doing and looking at some other properties and projects around the Bay Area. And the last question I'll leave you with is, when I was doing this research, the question came up, where will my child live when I die? And I just want to propose an opportunity, which is what community will be lucky enough to have your child in it? And I think that there's a lot of people... I think there's a lot of people, myself included, who want to live with your kids. So I'm excited to work with you on that. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Michaela. Jan Stokley from Housing Choices will be speaking about set-asides and new developments.
Great, welcome everybody. I'm so happy to see so many people here. I'm the Executive Director of Housing Choices, which is a nonprofit housing organization dedicated to creating quality, affordable housing for people with developmental disabilities. And we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. We work in the counties of Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito. And what we've been doing for the past 20 years really came out of the experience of a group of parents and service providers who had spent many years advocating for the public schools to create inclusion in education. But when their young adult became 22, there was no inclusionary housing in the community. So that was our origin, and that continues to be our focus. We basically partner with affordable housing developers and market rate developers to get them to commit for the life of the project that a certain percentage of the units will be rented to people with developmental disabilities at affordable rents. We currently have 18 properties that we support people to live at with 250 residents. We have 6 properties in planning and development and construction in our area coming online soon. The benefits of this model is we are funded by San Andreas Regional Center to maintain the waiting list for the set-aside units, so we can assure that as a unit becomes vacant, folks with developmental disabilities are going to be lined up to apply for that unit. So we're able to protect the unit for the life of the building, which is often 45 or 50 years. Our housing is affordable for someone without a Section 8 voucher. The example that Ashley just shared with you about all the financing models financing sources that have to be assembled to make that the case, that's what we're doing. Although we're partnering with developers so that they're assembling all the financing, but making the commitment of the units to people with developmental disabilities. Each individual is referred to apply for the housing by San Andreas Regional Center because they have an individual plan where their goal is to live in the community. And when that happens, then San Andreas Regional Center is itself committed to provide the individualized support services that will enable that person to be successful. But on top of each resident's individual supported living or independent living services, we are also vendorized by San Andreas Regional Center to provide a person at the housing community who works there and checks on residents and works with them regularly, and also all their varying service providers. And we meet weekly with the property managers and negotiate issues that come up to help each person retain their housing. We call the position resident coordinator. I think concierge sounds so much better. But it's another level of safety and problem solving that's not dependent on how it's going with each individual circle of support. Our housing is near public transit, shopping services, often in asset-rich communities. They're beautiful buildings with green building standards and professional management with our services on site as well. And see, these are examples of some of the buildings that we support residents to live at. We have buildings that have 100 units, and we have 29 of them. We have buildings that have 14 units, and we have 100% of them. So it's a whole range of type of building and percentage of units that have been set aside for developmental disabilities. And these are all over Santa Clara County and every possible type of community. The great thing about our model is it works for different types of housing. We have set-asides in large market rate properties. One of our properties has 450 market rate units, and 23 units have been set aside at affordable rents for people with developmental disabilities. We have set-asides in a senior housing property. Our population is aging with longer lifespans, and so we have a set-aside of 10 senior with developmental disabilities in a senior housing property. We're in affordable family housing where we can have access to 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units so that people who need live-in staff can get that extra bedroom. And then we have affordable studio properties, and we also support shared housing in single-family homes. So across the community, this model can work in a great variety of types of housing. Housing success depends on local advocacy. A big part of what we do is organize families in different communities to advocate with local government that they create housing plans that adopt this model so that people with developmental disabilities who grew up in that community can be housed in that community. And I think you heard from Ashley, all the local governments that she's been in touch with to make this happen. Well, that's what we're organizing families to do in many of the cities in Santa Clara County, as well as Santa Cruz and Monterey County. Local advocacy is the key to our model. Housing is a huge issue for all income ranges. The priority in many of our cities is housing the homeless, and people don't often think about us, and we're often invisible. But each California jurisdiction, cities and counties, has a responsibility to meet its fair share of a regional housing need. And they're also required to plan for the housing needs of people with developmental disabilities. So there are tools in place in local government now for you to begin to make that case. The other thing about Santa Clara County and San Mateo County is that we are a very wealthy region, and so there's been a lot of development, and from that development in many of the cities, housing funds have been created to help subsidize affordable housing that are not available from the federal government, that are not available from state government. So the local advocacy piece makes a lot of sense, both because housing is planned and zoned for by city government, but also many of our cities are sitting on pots of affordable housing funds, and we want them to dedicate some of those funds to properties that include people with developmental disabilities. There's been a lot of advocacy at the state level to create more housing. And so over the next year, local governments are going to be doing a lot of planning on affordable housing, and your planning and participation is key. What we found over and over again in advocating with developers for our projects is that our voices are powerful. And you can ask Carol Berg, who's coming up next, with respect to her property in Santa Cruz, but oftentimes there are neighbors who do not want development in their community, and they turn out in force. Our voices and our stories, when we tell them, when we show up and tell them, they persuade not just our elected officials, but also our neighbors who had no idea that the young people who had spent their lives growing up in this community had nowhere to live once their parents reached their 60s, 70s, and 80s. We bring roots in the community, relationships in the community, and compelling stories and reasons for local government to plan for housing that includes people with developmental disabilities. 2018 will be a time of tremendous local advocacy for housing. It's scary that this tax reform proposal is going to reduce federal funding for housing, but again, we're in Silicon Valley, and because of office and other development, many of our jurisdictions have local housing funds. So local jurisdictions will need to do planning for how they're going to achieve their affordable housing goals in 2018 as a result of a bill that passed the California legislature in this September. And there's going to be a ballot initiative for state affordable housing bonds on the November 2018 ballot. Half of that money will go to support a program called the Multifamily Housing Program in the State Department of Housing and Community Development. That program allows for deep subsidies for special needs housing. That's why so many of our units have rents that are affordable to people with a studio renting for $350 or $500. That's because we got that housing program. This is going to be on the ballot in November. We all need to get organized and be part of that conversation and make sure it passes. The other thing that's really exciting is that market rate developers have not had an obligation to include affordable housing in their rental properties because of a decision called the Palmer case. Well, the legislature just in September 2017 overturned the impact of the Palmer case. So cities and counties are going to be looking at their legal ability to require developers in all market rate rental housing development to include a percentage that's affordable at different levels of affordability. Again, another amazing opportunity for all of us to get involved and tell City Council about our housing needs. And then you'll hear more about accessible dwelling units, but the state legislature has also made changes to prevent cities and counties from making it difficult to develop accessible dwelling units. So get involved. We have parents who are organizing in Palo Alto, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Cupertino, Santa Cruz. We support their organizing and efforts, and your voice is important. And when you stand up and tell your story at the local government level, it really makes a difference. Thank you.
And our last speaker, all the way from Santa Cruz, my home away from home, Carol Berg will be talking about accessory dwelling units.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Santa Cruz is this incredibly beautiful place to live. However, we have a little problem called, we're right over the hill from Silicon Valley, so we have these growth pressures. We also we host UCSC, which is even more growth pressure on our little city of 65,000 people. And to protect the city years and years, decades ago actually, the city put a green belt around the city, which means that the only way that the city of Santa Cruz can grow or create new housing is infill development. And so in 2002, the city looked at ways to address a housing crisis. Obviously, if you don't have very many housing sites, it's even more difficult to build housing. And the city has consistently been one of the top 3 or 4 least affordable places to live in the entire country, beating out many times communities in Silicon Valley. San Francisco usually beats us, but I mean, you don't want to be beaten, I guess, in terms of being the least affordable. But we have had an ongoing housing crisis, so the city was looking for ways to address this because we need all the housing we can get. So one of the things we looked at is one of our greatest assets is our backyards. These are little infill sites for something called an accessory dwelling unit. And you tuck these little units in the backyards, and you don't even necessarily know they're there. So an accessory dwelling unit is and commonly called an ADU, sometimes it's called a granny flat or second unit, is an additional housing unit on a single family lot. Traditionally, you can have a new detached unit. You build a unit in the backyard, or you might have actually attach it to your existing house, or you can do a garage conversion, take your existing garage and convert it into it. But the legislator did something this last year where they started to introduce developing junior ADUs. And they say this is a junior ADU is part of your existing house. It could be a garage conversion, but also could be you're carving out a part of your house to create a separate unit with a separate entry or however you want to configure it. But it provides much needed housing, rental housing in the area. So looking at these ADUs, and I call them magical ADUs because they really, really are magical. And these are the reasons why. From a city standpoint, they help to stabilize. You know, people are concerned about impact in the neighborhood. They actually help to stabilize neighborhoods because they add density where the city needs to add density, and we're going to have to get it somehow. And they add densities into neighborhoods while preserving the neighborhoods. They fit right in the fabric. And I know for the population that you're talking about, you're really looking at the single unit. You're looking where is my daughter or where is my son going to be living. This is also a stability because it gives, by the ADUs provide housing that is stable. They can be housed in the neighborhood. They can have a home in the neighborhood that they grew up in, where they know their neighbors. So it helps to give them stability as well as giving the city some stability. Another thing is that their ADUs are flexible. They can be for your sons and daughters can be living in your ADUs, especially in high-cost areas. This is really critical. You can also have the added income to be able to pay your mortgage. And in terms of developmentally disabled population, if a parent wants to be able to create secure housing over time, this income from the rental unit can be used over time to support the maintenance and management of both units, so that this is something that extends or gives you that flexibility. For seniors, it allows seniors to age in place. You can also have the little unit or the big house even as a caregiver's unit, which really adds in flexibility. They're just, as I said, magical. So the other thing is that they're really more affordable. You heard, about the high cost of developing housing, but you don't have to pay for the land. It's there. The infrastructure is there. You've got the roads that come in, you've got the driveways, you've got, the hookups and everything, so you don't have that cost. The site's graded, it's ready to build on. So you have those costs. And if you look at, this is an apartment, just the cost of an apartment building, how much of that is land? Now, this is not an affordable unit because you heard about the cost of affordable units. They're more like $450,000, or in the Bay Area, $500,000 a unit. But this is just a regular little apartment. Now, look what happens when you do an ADU. You've gotten rid of the cost of land. You've saved some costs in terms of building the ADU, in terms of the infrastructure costs and grading and all of that. But what happens when you take away the walls? You don't have to build the walls anymore because you're converting a garage, or you're converting, in the case of a junior AD, you're converting part of the house. So really, they are the least expensive way to actually build a new housing unit in any of these really high-cost communities where land is so expensive. So how do you do it? If you want to build an ADU, where do you start? And one of the things that's been mentioned already is the recent zoning that was passed, the recent legislation that was passed that basically is not giving cities a choice anymore. You know, where you might have run into a lot of opposition, the cities can't choose to turn you down automatically. And that's SB 1069 and AB 2299 went into effect in January of 2017. You basically, in most cases, can build your ADU as of right. If your ADUs usually require certain minimum lot size and certain size limitations on the unit as well. But if you're building it in your house as a junior ADU, you can do it. They also, one of the biggest restrictions on ADU development is parking. Now, the city of Santa Cruz in 2002 addressed parking in that we said you don't have to have parking you don't have to have covered parking if you build an ADU on the site, but we still were requiring parking. Well, this recent legislation said you're down to one parking space for the unit, or under certain circumstances, you don't have to provide any new parking, and they allow you to provide parking in the front yard setback, as we do in the city of Santa Cruz with ADUs, and also tandem parking. So there's a lot of flexibility, and this in the past has been one of the biggest deterrents to being able to build an ADU. The other thing that the legislation did was to not allow cities and counties to charge you an exorbitant amount in fees. They have to be proportional, and in terms of water and sewer hookup, which are some of the highest cost fees for cities, if they are in the main house or attached, you don't have to pay it at all. The city of Santa Cruz had done something similar in 2002, and it really, really makes a difference. And this, just to give you an idea of the amount of change that can happen because of the zoning that the state just did. The city of Santa Cruz implemented a lot of the things that the state is requiring other cities to do in 2002. And this is what happened to our numbers. You can see how ADU development just shot up to about 4 times what it was pre-zoning changes. So this is something also we're not going to go into detail here, but we're going to go into this in more detail in the breakout session at 1 o'clock. So we also had homeowner tools that we have manuals, garage conversion manuals, how-to manual, and also prototype design plans that can help people to build or become developers of their own ADUs. The city also had a loan program. It wasn't very successful, but this is something you might consider working with a local lender on, or your city on, and developing some kind of a low-income loan program. And this is just showing you our manual. It really does take you step by step by step. How do you think about your ADU? How do you develop your ADU? How do you then rent your ADU? It takes you step by step by step through the whole process, and it really helps you as a homeowner become a developer. One of the things the city doesn't address in its program is ownership rights. We require that the property owner live on the property. We did put something in the zoning for people who are under conservatorship, allowing them to fulfill that owner occupancy requirement. And we did that specifically for the developmentally disabled community. Not all of your jurisdictions have that. So that's something you might want to look at, and you would want to look at and try to maybe change within your own cities, because it's certainly something that I think most cities would be receptive to. There are a lot of other ways of owning ADUs you can do tenancy in common and all that most cities don't support. So this is something that you would need to explore with an attorney, but it's something as you're thinking about an ADU, you certainly need to really address that. Speaking of support, one of the things that ADUs need in many communities is to take away the image that they are something bad for a community, or they're going to depress, the property values or something, all of which are not true. And community education was an incredibly important part of our program. We had workshops and public hearings when we were developing our ADU program in 2003. We had video on community television. We had great press. We had about 24 articles within 1 year on ADUs. And what it did is it changed the community's perception of ADUs as to being something that just annoys them with extra parking in their neighborhood to something that actually is allowing their sons and daughters to be able to continue to live in the community, or for them to be able to downsize and age in place in the neighborhood that they don't want to move out of. So I think that the education of a community is an important part of this. And then the other thing is that there are programs that you can think about doing. You can partner with nonprofits or partner with your communities. We just started 2 years ago, we're in the second year of a pilot program for My House, My Home with Habitat for Humanity, where we're building ADUs for seniors who are at risk of losing their properties, because it will provide that added income. It also provides us with the city with an affordable housing unit. And so it's a win-win for everyone. And the beauty of it is, for Habitat, in a high-cost area like this, land is so expensive, and it takes away the cost of land for them to be able to meet their mission of building affordable housing units. So it just meets everybody's desires, and this is something that you might think of in the future as something that you could pursue. And I have to say that, we briefly went over what the city's affordable housing program is, and like I said, we're going to be going into more detail at the 1 o'clock session. But this program won about every national award you could, including one of 5 national EPA Smart Growth Achievement Awards. And so it really is a program that was cutting edge and is being used by other jurisdictions and can be accessed by you. The tools that we developed are available to anyone, and if you want to, you can go on our website, or if you can't find them, sometimes it's hard to find things on our website, you can contact me and I'll provide you with a link, and that's it.
All right, we have just a few minutes for questions. So why don't you just come on up to the table, and we'll take as many as we can. Fada, go ahead, start.
Okay, I have a question for Carol. So, in talking about the ADUs.
Speak into the mic. I know you're tall.
Okay, sorry. I have a question for Carol. So, when you're talking about the ADUs, one of the things is the regional center doesn't offer supported living services SLS for kids that live at home with their families, or individuals that live at home with their families. One way to address that issue would be if we could have an ADU, but give it another address, like a unit, B unit.
Well, ADUs actually do have separate addresses. It's like there'll be a, 14 and a half as opposed to, so it has an independent separate address. And the other thing is that this is something you can, on a local level, address. If this is something that's important as a need, then you can address this if your local jurisdiction doesn't do that. But we do assign a separate address for ADUs.
All right, we're slow on time, so Stephen next.
Thank you. As you know, many of our efforts for building have been sandbagged the past 5 years under the threat that services will be withheld if our kids aren't living close proximity to certifiably neurotypicals, right? So my question to you is that these new projects that we're thinking about, at what point do we engage our regional center, early or late, according to the development of the projects? Anybody?
Our organization focuses on set-asides with affordable housing developers and market rate developers, and we bring the regional center into the dialogue as soon as we have a nibble from the local government or the developer, and they're an active partner, they sign a memorandum of understanding, agreeing to the project concept and making certain service commitments to the project. So for our organization, they're a very active partner, and as soon as it seems like we have something viable, we bring them into the discussion and ask them to sign a memorandum of understanding.
Real quickly, excuse me, on ADUs and the problem of supported living services and all the ADU models, I just wanted to let everyone know, my name is Karen Mulvaney, that the State Council on Developmental Disabilities just added this week to its legislative priorities a change in the Lanterman Act to ensure that any legally recognized separate housing unit would be eligible for supported living services.
Bravo! Woo! That's great news. Thank you. Denise.
I have a question for Ashley. With your model using low-income housing tax credit, you indicated affordable, you indicated that it was 100% for people with special developmental disabilities. How are you getting around the 25% rule?
Okay, so the 25% rule only applies to the HUD Section 811 program, and because we're not tapping into that, there is no density limit in the state of California or even at the federal level. So that's something that I do. I do a lot of advocacy work, and I was actually flying back from DC last night because of this issue, and I was actually in this office of Senator Menendez's office, who is actually responsible for that 25% issue. And I think that creates a lot of myth amongst everyone that you can't set aside more than 25% in any of the developments, and I can tell you that it's completely false. And that's why that leads, goes back to your question about engaging regional center. With my Villa de Vida project, I did engage regional center early on, and it was more of a information session because I wanted them to know what was happening in their own neighborhood so that they can be better prepared in terms of dealing with their regional center clients. I did get a lot of pushback about that 25%. I even was told by somebody in Sacramento that I have to limit it to 25%, which didn't end well. But that said, I believe in choice, and I don't think government should tell you how many people should be able to live together, and that the government's role is to support the individual's choice for whatever is best appropriate for that person.
Yes. All right. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I think this question refers to mostly the nonprofit housing model and the set-asides and new developments. Then the big con is the regional centers basically pick the tenants. Oh. Is that right? Because you lose when you get tax credits involved. You said yourself that a con was that you don't get to necessarily award your volunteers or donors.
Oh, so yes. Our parents who advocate for set-aside units know that they're going to be in a lottery with others, and they have no special guarantee that they're going to get a unit. The Regional Center refers people to Housing Choices for housing planning and housing assessment, and then we help them place them on appropriate wait lists. But housing per se is subject to fair housing guidelines, and all housing developers and property managers are going to follow those guidelines. The great thing about our model is we have a separate waiting list for the units that are set aside for people with developmental disabilities. So those units are always going to be protected, and they're always going to be occupied by someone who has a developmental disability. But within that separate wait list, there is no preference for people who were more involved in making the project happen.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna have to move on. One more question, then I'm gonna try to squeeze in a question. Go ahead.
Question is for Dana or Anna or other community homes. How are you overcoming neighborhood concerns? Before you move in, there's some protection, but then after you're there, dealing with the neighbors when there are issues with our kids.
So this is a tough issue, and I think generally the way we deal with it is we go out of our way to be the best possible neighbor. And that means to get around and to meet all of our neighbors, to understand, their concerns, and to be essentially communicative, because a lot of the NIMBYism comes from fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But it can be a challenging problem, and I could tell you a few stories.
We don't have time, unfortunately. Anna, why don't you answer really quickly? And
Yes, when we first built our first dream project, actually we had 3 community meetings with the neighborhood people who are interested in finding out what's going on with the property before we even built it. And the thing is, it's just like Dana was saying, that to be more open is great. We are working on phase 2, and so we have other properties, land that we have identified in building this particular project. And one of the neighborhood was really hostile. Basically, they come and accuse you of all kinds of things. And but this is the thing that we do have to deal with. But I think it's also very important to understand the local government structure and also build relations with the local government, because there is not enough affordable housing for our population at all. And if we have a sympathetic ear in the local city government, that would be great.
well, thank you, everybody. I wish we had more time. We do have so many stories to share, truly. Thank you, everybody. We are going to take a little break. Everybody's going to grab a lunch, and everybody is going to come back into the